When Germany surrendered, people flooded the streets of London to celebrate the end of a nightmare. For a moment, the world exhaled, but the alliance that defeated Hitler was little more than a marriage of convenience. With the common enemy gone, the two remaining global heavyweights looked at the world through completely incompatible lenses. The United States championed capitalism, free markets, and individual liberty. The Soviet Union pushed communism, relying on a state-controlled economy and strict one-party rule. The Soviets had just lost 27 million people in the war. Driven by that loss and a deep-seated paranoia, Joseph Stalin purged his own military ranks and systematically installed puppet governments across Eastern Europe to ensure no one would ever march into his country again. Meanwhile, Harry Truman had been president for barely 2 weeks when someone pulled him aside to explain that the United States now held a monopoly on the most destructive weapon in human history. The global power vacuum was instantly filled by two systems that viewed each other as existential threats. Reluctant allies became rivals overnight, each armed with the capacity to end human civilization. This animated map shows the reality of post-war Europe. Winston Churchill gave this divide a name, an Iron Curtain. The continent was split in two, with each side sealed off behind its own political and physical wall. Washington responded with a strategy called containment. The U.S. wouldn't try to rip communism out of the places the Red Army already occupied, but they committed every available resource to ensuring it didn't spread a single inch further. The first major test of this boundary happened in Berlin. When Stalin blockaded every road into the city to starve out the democratic sector, American and British planes flew around the clock for nearly a year. They delivered food, coal, and even candy for children directly from the sky. Stalin eventually blinked and lifted the blockade without achieving a single goal. The West had sustained 2 million people using nothing but transport planes and logistics, winning the first major showdown of the Cold War without firing a single shot. The American nuclear monopoly evaporated in 1949 when Soviet spies successfully stole U.S. research to build a bomb of their own. The playing field was suddenly level, and both superpowers began pouring ungodly amounts of money into building even deadlier weapons. By the 1950s, scientists had successfully developed hydrogen bombs, roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the devices that leveled Hiroshima. By the 60s, both sides stockpiled enough warheads to destroy the entire planet several times over. This stockpile gave rise to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The logic was simple. If one side launched a nuclear strike, the other would fire back, ensuring both nations ended as radioactive rubble. Because fighting directly guaranteed total annihilation, the superpowers turned to the domino theory, the belief that if one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would topple next. This pushed the conflict into brutal proxy wars, like the one in Korea, where millions died while the superpowers fought through surrogates. Even the space race served a military purpose. When the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite into orbit, it did more than just beep. It proved they had the rocket technology to drop a nuclear warhead on any American city in minutes. The terror of total destruction protected the superpowers from each other, but it pushed the actual devastation of war onto the rest of the globe. This reconnaissance image from 1962 shows the moment the Cold War almost ended human history. American planes spotted Soviet missile-ready tents and fuel trailers in Cuba, placing nuclear warheads within a 13-minute flight of Washington, D.C. As the U.S. imposed a naval blockade, a Soviet submarine sat trapped beneath the surface. Temperatures inside soared over 100 degrees when the air conditioning failed. Cut off from Moscow for days, the crew was exhausted, overheated, and convinced that a global war had already begun. When American destroyers began dropping depth charges as warning shots, Captain Savitsky ordered his men to arm their nuclear torpedo. He believed his only option was to immediately sink the American fleet before his own submarine was completely destroyed. Launching the weapon required a unanimous vote from 3 officers. 2 agreed, but the third, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. Despite the heat, chaos, and his captain's rage, Arkhipov insisted they surface and contact Moscow first. The logic of MAD assumed that the fear of retaliation would keep the world in a state of stable, if terrifying, equilibrium. But in a dark submarine 90 miles off Florida, that stability came down to a single exhausted officer who decided he wasn't ready to end the world. Following the crisis, both sides established a direct hotline between their capitals and signed arms control treaties. This era of détente was a deliberate attempt to dial back the immediate threat of nuclear war and avoid another 13-minute countdown. While the nuclear threat cooled, the proxy wars remained hot. The United States lost 58,000 lives in the jungles of Vietnam, and the Soviets eventually marched into their own version of the same disaster in Afghanistan. Ronald Reagan took office with a plan to confront the Soviets head-on. He significantly increased defense spending and introduced Star Wars, a space-based missile defense system designed to make Soviet nuclear weapons obsolete. To keep pace with American technology, the Soviet Union tried to outspend its own collapsing economy. By the time Mikhail Gorbachev arrived with reforms to save the system, the financial weight of the arms race had already pushed the Soviet state to the breaking point. The Cold War concluded as a marathon of economic endurance. Success went to the system that could bankroll 40 years of extreme military spending without its internal infrastructure collapsing under the weight. Gorbachev's policies of openness inadvertently acted as a self-destruct button for the empire. One by one, Eastern European nations held elections and broke free, and for the first time in 45 years, Moscow didn't send in the tanks to stop them. In 1989, the Iron Curtain finally rusted away. Thousands of people flooded the checkpoints in Berlin, dancing on top of the wall and dismantling the concrete symbol of their imprisonment with their bare hands. Shortly after, the individual Soviet republics declared their independence, and the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. The Cold War leaves behind a striking paradox. Humanity spent 45 years building the exact tools required for its own extinction, yet the absolute terror of using those weapons is precisely what forced global leaders to put the red button away.